Hello, everyone, and welcome to Magma Ragers episode 12. With me is Pandemonia, as usual, and we're going to be discussing budget-friendly decks today. So, if you have been struggling on ladder, and you're, let's say, a free-to-play player or a newer player, this is the episode for you. We're going to be discussing some very cheap decks with the specification that it's like under 2,000 dust. That's the sort of um, uh, random uh, like cutoff we've imposed on ourselves for defining what is budget. Um, and yeah, we're going to be showing some deck lists, discussing the decks, and yeah. Um, yeah, first off though, like the one important thing is that you should definitely build your collection. So if you have, um, you know, if you have some legendaries like Thalnos and Alexstrasza, well then all of a sudden Freeze Mage becomes like a more budget-friendly deck for you because you've already got the large portion of the dust portion that costs. Or if you've already got the Rogue quest, Quest Rogue becomes relatively cheap. Um, yeah, so that's definitely
Exactly.
something to consider.
Because at some point, even if you're free to play, there's a good chance you've opened up, possibly one or two playable legendaries in your travels. Leroy is very good, Patches,
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
mean if you have Leroy and Patches, then Pirate Warrior becomes very cheap as well. I mean all of these decks are like half the cost of Pirate Warrior essentially. So Pirate Warrior was often talked about as a budget-friendly deck, but these decks are really really budget-friendly.
I think without much ado, I think we're gonna jump in, which is the first one we're gonna be talking about, Dib.
Yeah, so we're gonna be talking about the Hunter first. There we have three lists here. The middle one is a more expensive, ironically, Face Hunter or kind of more Face Hunter deck. But the other two we have Nick Chipper's mid-range hunter list and Muzzy slash Xeris's um, mid-range hunter list. So personally, I'm a fan of the Muzzy Xeris list. I've been playing this quite a bit myself. I think it's pretty strong. There's really not that much that's too expensive in it. The most like there's only one epic, right? And that's Rat Pack. And everything else in the deck is rares and commons pretty much. I mean there's some really powerful commons like Crackling Razormaw is really really strong card from Ungoro. Um, yeah. Your thoughts on this deck,
Yeah,
Panamania?
Crackling Razormaw, Jort McCaw, and also what's always nice about commons like Jordan McCaw is the fact that they can give you cards you don't have in your collection. So they can
Yeah.
give you that Swamp King Dread that you don't have. They can give, they can
That
give you all
Tyrantus.
they're Tyrantus, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's Hunter. I think in terms of people constantly say what's the key card, what card should I never play this deck with, and I think for me I feel the rares that are really important in the deck are Savannah Highmains. I
Yeah,
think you will
pretty
probably
much.
agree with me there.
Yeah. I mean, Savannah Highmane is by far the most important rare. I mean, just looking at this list, it's only really otherwise Eaglehorn Bow, I think that's a rare, and Infested Wolf. So, I mean, yeah, like Savannah Highmane is definitely the sort of top end what allows you to beat control decks with a deck like this. Um, yeah. So, what would you say is like the overall strategy with a deck like this, Panamonia?
Uh, so with mid-range hunter in specifically, it's you're looking to just get a solid early curve. So the dream start involves a one drop, whether it's uh, your what's it, your alley cat or your I mean, so we see in Muzzy's list he runs fireflies,
Yeah.
Jordan McCaw. You're looking for those kind of starts, and what's really good is a turn one alley cat into turn two crackling razormaw, because especially a lot of decks can kill one of the one ones, but they can't kill both. So
Yeah.
it ensures that you get some value, and then obviously the kindly grandmother's pretty strong two drop. Then as you curve into Eagle Horn Bow or Animal Companion, into Houndmaster, into Tundra,
Yeah, I mean,
basically
the idea is that there's of this deck is there's a lot of fallbacks for every sort of curve slot, right? Only
exactly.
really when you start hitting Tundra Rhino and High Main are there only really one option for that curve slot. Whereas like um, in those turns, often you might just play something cheaper and hero power, right? So you can also fill in hero powers a lot with this deck, but really what you want to be doing is you want to be getting on board, controlling the board, and snowballing from there. if you have control of the board and you can play a high main, there's very few decks that can deal with that. That's a very, very powerful play. Um, and if you have board, a lot of your other stuff becomes better, right? If you have board, Eaglehorn Bow is better.
Yeah,
Crackling Razormaw is better. Houndmaster is better. You know, all these cards on Scavenging Hyena, one of the ways to really run away with the game as well. Those cards are all very, very good, and even better when you already have the board. So this list is, or mid-range hunter in general, is sort of very focused on that, winning the board and then uh, applying pressure to your opponent's face once you have like a firm enough grip on the board.
yeah. And there's an old Hearthstone saying that goes, if you attack with a high main, you win. And it's
Yeah,
like it obviously starts off as sort of like a joke slash meme, but like a lot of the times, if you are connecting with phase with a high main and your opponent has not dealt with it,
yeah,
you a lot of times you do win. So
yeah,
high
yeah,
main is one of the big, yeah.
yeah. I
I mean,
mean, one of the most difficult things for especially new players to learn when playing a deck like this, I think, is knowing when to switch from going from controlling the board to pushing face. You know, at some
definitely.
point, the favorable trades are going to run out, and you're just going to need to make things awkward for your opponent by applying pressure to their face. You know, you always, I mean, with every deck, you want to look at like what your opponent can do to answer you in every given turn, and if you can find a way to make it really awkward, and you can be a bit greedy, sometimes a bit later, maybe turns 4 or 5 or so, you can be a bit greedier to push face. Then you know you can really put your opponent on the back foot with your hunter hero power.
Yeah, I mean, just like in a lot of like in some of the slower matchups, the best way to win is to actually just click the hero power and then fit in whatever else you can after that. Sometimes it's not actually down to if you can play on curve. It's simply about weaving in those hero powers. And if you watch some of the pros play, sometimes that I mean, there's been games where you watch a pro not play a turn six high main, but instead opt to go for just hero power plus something else, just to try and push through that extra 2 damage.
Sure. I think in most control match scenarios, you're probably definitely going to play the high main on 6. But
Yeah,
there are definitely scenarios where, especially later in the game, let's say you have a four, like an infested wolf and a scavenging hyena. Instead of just playing those onto the board, you're definitely going to want to maybe just play the infested wolf and hero power rather than playing the hyena. But that's
yeah,
also because hyena is one of those cards. So scavenging hyena is a 2 mana 2/2 that when a friendly beast dies, it gets +2/+1. So this is one of the cards that is very snowball focused. The majority of minions in this deck are beasts, so
yeah,
you can make the trades and you can really snowball from those trades. You don't actually lose that much in terms of stats on the board because the scavenging hyena starts getting really, really big, and that's one way to just completely run away with games. And you know those openings where you go like alley cat, and then they play like a 1/1 or something, or a 1/2, and you go scavenging hyena, and then
in
you trade both of
trade,
them.
yes.
Yeah, and then you end
Yeah,
up with
that
a
that
6/4 on turn two. That's pretty good.
yeah, definitely. So, I mean, and now also obviously you're running cards like a Lacquer Crawler, so that does help. Matchups like obviously Pirates. I
Yeah,
mean, and a lot of the cards are basic. Other cards, I think you could include the Nesting Rock.
yeah. Nesting rock
The,
is not a bad option,
another,
especially if you don't have something like infested wolf or rat pack.
yeah,
I mean, even carrion grub is like a poor man's substitute for rat pack, probably, right? Like
yeah,
it sits there as a very good houndmaster target. It's not quite as good because it isn't as um, it's more susceptible to single target removal than rat pack, which sort of requires silence plus removal.
yeah,
But carrion grub can be a decent substitute for that even.
yeah, definitely. So I think, yeah, in terms of, like we said, cards that let's say as you want to build this deck stronger. Like the thing about this is amusingly they're not. I think you'll probably agree with me. There aren't actually that many legendaries or uh, you know things you actually need to add. I mean, the only card I can really say you might want to add is maybe Swamp King Dread, and even there it only sees play. It doesn't even see play in that many lists these days.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a fun inclusion, right? If you're just
Yeah,
looking to have fun and you have a Swamp King Dread, sure, you can include it.
and it's a
Um,
7 mana 9/9.
yeah, like there's nothing wrong with that. It's not going to make the list considerably worse. But to be honest, I think like Muzzy and Zarez are two very, very good players. So this being like they both independently came to this list, which tells you a lot. That tells you a lot that this list is really, really good. It doesn't mean it'll be the top tier list going forward because the meta is still changing, right? Hunter is quite a fluid class in terms of how you can tech it, right? You can put in the more greedy cards like Swamp King Dread if the meta slows down a bit, so you have a bit more gas going into the late game. But this list right now is probably, I think, a near optimal list, considering these players have played it to very high legend ranks. This is definitely a deck that you could play to legend if you got sufficiently skilled with it.
Definitely, and that's the thing about these is like people constantly think, oh, I have to have all the cards. It's like no, a deck like this can. And the nice thing about a very nice thing about the Hunter Midrains particularly is that it doesn't have many good matchups, but doesn't have many bad matchups. It's got
Sure.
it's one of those decks that has a reasonable chance all round.
Yeah, yeah. It isn't really it isn't a deck that just gets blown out when you queue into like let's say Miracle Rogue. You're unfavored, but it's not like an instant loss, right? It's not like an 80-20 matchup. It's like 55 favored to them, right? So you've always got a chance of winning. And you know, it's a quite an important thing I think that Hunter teaches new players is also how to play different matchups. Certain matchups you might want to apply more pressure. Like let's say against Rogue, you're much more willing to let them take a slightly favorable trade if it means you can push damage to the face because most well no rogues really have healing, right? So if you can apply pressure and put them into range of your hero power, uh, then you can win like that. Even if you lose the board a bit earlier than you might be happy doing that against other decks. So I think personally, mid-range hunter is I think one of the best decks for newer players to learn with. It
Yes.
teaches you a lot of very important skills, and every matchup is different because of how you sort of want to go about your game plan and the finesse of the game plan.
No, no, definitely. And I mean, that's the thing as well.
Yeah,
It's a solid deck. It teaches you a lot of mechanics. Also, things like orders of attacking. Because
yeah,
sometimes it's a case of,
and
especially now with the
positioning with the
positioning
Direwolf Alpha.
with the Direwolf Alpha. Sometimes the attacking is relevant with the Crackling Razor Maw. The
Yeah,
ordering is important with animal companions. If you get Liak,
yeah.
like so, I think there's quite a lot of It's a very good all-round deck to teach new players. I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely a very good deck. Um, I think we've covered Hunter and mid-range Hunter in particular, which is pretty much the main Hunter archetype right now. Um, but some Hunter might not be the class for everyone. Obviously, certain players have classes they prefer playing, and whilst maybe not every class has particularly great budget decks, we're talking like top tier, you can reach legend. This is what the pros play in tournaments sometimes, kind of lists. Um, not every class has that, but there are a few other classes with really good lists. And the next one we're going to be talking about is Secret Mage. So, for a lot of newer players, Mage is definitely one of the classes they gravitate to first. It's quite easy to build relatively decent basic Mage decks, which are essentially free. Um, there's a lot of really good lists. I know like Sottle has one on like Icy Veins from that's been around forever. That's one of the ones you point to like very, very new players to. But if you want to play something a bit more interesting, then Secret Mage is definitely a good mage deck to play. And
No, definitely, yeah. I mean, especially now, it's kind of popped out of. It's the kind of deck that's popped out of nowhere.
yeah,
I mean, it's kind of been a sleeper. I mean, the guys at Dota Reaper have been basically saying, guys, watch out, this deck is going to be big soon." And now it's kind of it has.
yeah. I mean, Secret Mage is definitely now all of a sudden the talk of the town. It's a deck that doesn't look like it does that much, but it makes things really awkward for your opponent. And there's a lot of things that make the deck quite interesting to play because every game is very different. Especially if we look at Citrax's more budget-friendly version here. I mean, he runs Babbling Books. Which are going to give you sort of different spells every game, so you have to learn different ways to play around it. Your Arcanologist is going to give you well, I mean, in this deck, there's only two different secrets. but you have to learn when your opponent's going to play a powerful spell, when they're going to play a powerful minion, and how to use your um, secrets best. Then there's also stuff like setting up your secrets or playing them with a Kirin Tor Mage to make Cabal Crystal Runner cheaper. When you go something like turn 3 Kirin Tor Mage Secret, turn 4 5/5 Cabal Crystal Runner, that's a pretty strong way to curve out.
Definitely. And like you're saying, being able to over the course of time learn. Okay, it's Major's turn 7 coming up. Okay, he runs things like Flame Strike. They run things like Firelands Portal. And now even if your opponent does actually know that you are running, that,
Yeah,
the fact that now they still have to now all of a sudden think, oh, I need to I need to now activate, or a term we say proc. You have to now proc that secret
yeah,
with something else, and it still makes things quite awkward a lot of the times.
yeah, definitely. Um, I think in this deck as well, like everything is very very cheap. The only card that is above rare level, and I mean I'd say most of these are actually commons, right?
Yeah,
Uh, but the only card that's above rare level really is Primordial Glyph. And if you want to play Mage, if you're a player that enjoys the Mage class, Primordial Glyph is a very, very good card. I mean, one of the cards we pegged really early is a card to craft for Mage, and
yeah,
pretty much one of the really important cards driving forward a lot of Mage decks. That and Arcanologist are sort of the two reasons we're seeing quite a variation in Mage right now. Everything from Freeze Mage to the Burn Control Mages to these Secret Mages and even Tempo Mages.
yeah.
Um,
It's the ability to discover whether it's cheap removal, whether it's cheap board clear, whether it's another pyroblast. I mean, I mean, like now, if you've watched a lot of competitive tournaments, you literally, there's been a lot of different. You see it pulling things like, 3 mana Kabbalah's Tombs, 8 mana
yeah,
Pyroblasts, 2 mana Fireballs are quite strong as well. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the deck is very very interesting,
tempo
and
oriented.
yeah. So yeah, I think this deck also teaches you very different things to the Hunter deck. Whilst the Hunter deck is more about curving out, controlling the board, this one is very much more tempo oriented. So it's like sometimes you'll save things. Maybe you don't play Medivh's Valet on 2 without a secret, obviously. So you might just ping on 2. You might make plays that are less tempo in the immediate like in the present for a better tempo later, right? You might have 4 mana on turn 4 and a Cabal Crystal Runner that's reduced to 4, but maybe it's better to play your secret or play your Primordial Glyph and then you pick a secret off that, and then your Cabal Crystal Runner gets even cheaper, right? So this
Yeah,
deck is very much about learning how to play with those tempo plays, and I
and
think that
also
teaches you very different skills.
yeah, it comes also in terms of at what point you decide, okay, I'm going to now ignore the board, and I've
Yes.
got things like I've got things like fireballs in hand. Let's say I've got I've got I'm in enough life. I don't need to worry about trading the board. I can be over on the board, but okay, I can now just start pumping burnout. And I mean, this is even the burn mage and the freeze mage are constantly doing that in terms of
Yeah. So yeah, this also teaches you a little bit about like playing to your outs, right? Let's say you've gone through a grindy game, your opponent's on 10 HP, you've got a 2 attack minion, uh, and you could trade let's say it's an Arcanologist into his 3/2, or but you have Fireball, Primordial Glyph, and Mana Worm left in your deck, right? It's probably better to just go face with the 3/2, I mean with the 2/3, and ping his face. So that way you set up for Fireball being an out if you draw it. You set up for Primordial Glyph into, let's say, a Fireball or a Pyroblast um, being an out. So you set up for a lot more of these outs, and that's definitely something that's important to learn as a player as well.
yeah, definitely. So I think I think we've spoken a lot about the fact that this deck is cheap. It's got a lot of I mean the mage, it's one of the first classes you start with, so it's got a lot of versatility. I
Yeah,
mean you've got I mean just basics. You've got the fireballs and the frost bolts. Mana Worm's common, Sorcerer's Apprentice is common, Arcane Intellect is a basic card. Firelands Portal, I believe you get for free
Karazhan, yeah. From
from
the first,
Karazhan,
the like
from the
introductory
first
wing of Karazhan, so
yeah
it's
the
free
one
as
with
well. Yeah.
what's his name? With
Prince
Medivh, when you,
Malchezaar.
yeah, Prince Malchezaar, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, all round, it's a really, I mean, Firelands Portal is a great card as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we also see a list on the left here, Puxin's Secret Mage, which is a more expensive version of this. So this is running some epics like Spellbender and Ice Block, and running Yogg-Saron as well. So it's a deck that you can tweak as well. Let's say counter spells and mirror entities aren't really working in the meta at the moment. You can go for some different secrets. Mana binds, potion of polymorphs, spellbenders. Ethereal Arcanist is also in the Puxin Mage that we see and not in the Cytrax one.
Yeah.
So that's also a good card to sub in maybe if you're missing some stuff. And also, if you just enjoy our Lord and Savior Yogg-Saron, then said with very much of a heavy hand of salt. Um, yeah, if you just enjoy Yogg-Saron and the completely random elements that come from that, then you can, fit them into even just the Cytrex Mage list. You could drop let's say, a Fylan's Portal for a Yogg, and that can definitely, um, win you some games that you weren't going to win before.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, this game does also this particular deck. It does also have some of those casino mage elements of you can primordial glyph into some silly things. You can babbling book into some silly things that your deck
Yeah,
doesn't usually do.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of the things that you would create for this mage deck are definitely going to be good going forward, right? I mean, the
yeah.
only ones that are probably iffy in any other decks are stuff like Kirin Tormage and Cabal Crystal Runners, right? Everything else here, and Cabal
Oh, and the
Lackey.
spellbenders and the spellbenders.
Well, no, no, I'm talking about, sorry, for Cytrax's
Oh
mage
yeah,
list.
okay, yeah,
So,
definitely. Yeah.
so a lot of the cards there, like Primordial Glyph, is going to be good in any mage decks going forward. So if you want to play mage, Primordial Glyph is definitely a card worth crafting, as we've mentioned before.
Yeah.
So that's quite nice. And then third deck we have is what I think is probably one of the best classes for free-to-play players, and that's Druid, and specifically Token Druid. So this is a deck from Fade 61606. It's like a very much a free to play list, only 1,000 dust total cost. This is not the sort of top tier list you're going to see players play in tournaments, so this list definitely has room um, for growth, but
Yeah.
it is a very very solid list, and I mean
The guy
it's a
made
list.
legend with it.
Yeah, the guy made legend with it. So it is definitely a list you can play, and it is like Token Druid is definitely a very very good deck for newer players to play.
Yeah. So this particular, I mean, so because this is a token druid inherently is a very all-in deck, this kind of deck is very helpful in terms of, you know, teaching players at what point do you ignore like pretend certain area of effect cards aren't in your opponent's hand. At what
Yeah,
time you've got to, you know, in the beginning of the game, you might want to play, you might want to only put 3 to 4 minions on your board, and not completely overload the board and just push through enough damage to put your opponent under pressure. Then eventually, if it reaches to the later stage of the games where you really, let's say, need to put that extra damage, you might have to at some point, kind of go, okay, if he has the flame strike, I lose, but I have to, like, this is the only play I make that allows me to win.
yeah. Sometimes you have like three fours on the deck on the board or something, and like he has a 6/6, right? But if you push face with all of them, he can only clear one of them in a turn without something
Exactly.
like a flame strike. So this is one of those decks that teaches you, because your board is wide. Often it's sometimes better to just go face and force your opponent to trade, because they're gonna have to trade at a much slower rate. And also it does have cards like Savage Roar and Power of the Wild, Mark of the Lotus, which are the key cards that really reward a wide board, as well as Frostwolf Warlord, which is a card that this deck is running that is not
In the normal
common in
list.
sort of your top tier lists. Frostwolf Warlord, I played a bit of a list very similar to this that I made myself on my NA accounts, which is like totally free to play. It has like barely any cards. And Frostwolf Warlord often performs really, really good. Actually, you get, sometimes you just go on like turn five, you get like an 8/8 or a 10/10, and like that can pretty much like win you the game by itself. So it's definitely a surprising card. But probably something that I would replace with something like a living mana at some if you happen to have living mana.
Yeah,
Um,
living mana. I mean, yeah, I mean, even cards like Bittertide Hydra, I can immediately think, or maybe 5 drops you might want instead of Frostwolf Warlord.
yeah, I
You
mean
know,
then there's also stuff like Vicious Fledgling, which is really good. Instead of maybe
oh,
something
Vicious
like
Fledgling is
a Pantry Spider, which is yeah, Vicious Fledgling is not in this list, but definitely something you could include, and that's only a rare.
Vicious Fledgling. Reason why, yeah, why it's probably one of the most important is that card alone can win you games. Like if you innovate that out turn one
Yeah,
and your opponent can't kill it, that
uh,
you hit face. Then if you choose Wind Fury, you get to attack again and adapt again.
yeah,
So there's like some actually
it can get
some
pretty insane.
exactly some really crazy crazy things you can do.
Yeah,
Uh,
and this deck as well also has Total and Forager, which is another one of those cards with the sort of random effect of giving you, uh, you know, uh, well, in this case, minions with 5 or more attack. So it can give you cards that you don't necessarily have in your collection to play with. And I think, that's something that a bunch of these decks had. The Jewel McCall and the Hunter, the Babbling Book, and the mage. And this is a way as well to teach players. Sometimes you get that Tyrantus once again, and then although Tyrantus looks like such an amazing minion to a new player, there's a reason it's not in any top tier decks. It just hits the board and doesn't do anything. But if your opponent has like, 3 4 4s, they're not going to trade 3 4 4s into Tyrantus. They're going to go face,
yeah,
and you're going to spend 3 turns trading Tyrantus to actually get anything, right?
yeah.
Or 3 5 5s, they're gonna race you faster than you could race them by hitting them with Tyrantus. So, you know, the deck can definitely help to teach those kind of lessons as well.
Because the thing is also like a lot of people assess, and I mean this is kind of I think through Hearthstone history, when people look at Discover cards, they're like, oh, but those cards are bad, so it's a bad card. But people eventually realized, and we made this mistake recently, like I know a lot of people with Hydrologist, is that the fact that you get extra cards,
Yeah,
e- even if they are largely bad cards, an extra free card is a lot of the times good. And in the case of
yeah,
the Total Foragers, you gain a 2 mana 2/2, which is, yes, not the greatest stats, but the fact is you're getting a card for free.
yeah,
And a lot of the times that card, I mean, because it's greater than 5 attack,
yeah,
so it does mean, you can do
yeah. I
some
mean, it's very
quite,
often gonna be like a minion that you want to play maybe later in the game. So you can go all in on your board, and then if they clear it, maybe you have like a high main or something random like that. Uh, that you've gotten off it. Because Total and Forager is, of course, just a completely random effect, not really a
exact,
discover.
yeah. So,
So, yeah.
okay, so yeah, so
Yeah, so I mean, I think this list is really good, and as we said, um, there is a bunch of things you could do to improve it. Also, if you're getting plagued by pirate warriors, this is a very very good list. The
yeah.
token druids generally do quite well against pirate warriors, and this one in particular is running 2 Galaka crawlers as the only
And also you
rare in the
just fill up
deck. So
and also you fill up the board quite quickly. So Pirate Warrior doesn't run any mass removal, so you can a lot of the times just
yeah,
fight for the board a lot more efficiently. If you try to outrace, a lot of times you will end up in a bit of trouble.
yeah.
So I
But you
would
can,
not
yeah,
recommend that.
but you can definitely control the board. And when you have the wide board, you have all the pump spells and the savage roars and those kind of things that
Yeah,
can really reward you.
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very good deck. Definitely one of my first recommendations to any newer players. And we'll put links to all these decks in the description on YouTube and whatnot. And this one in particular comes with a full guide here on Hearthpo and Mulligan strats, some videos. So, this is a very good one to teach you a lot of basic lists, basic things. And there's also some lists, links here to, let's say, Frozen's list or, some other lists that can, the top tier lists for once you get more cards. Maybe you're really loving Token Druid and you want to craft the cards for the tier 1 version. Um, it's definitely a good deck to learn to play with and a good deck to play.
Yeah, definitely. So, but yeah, like I think yeah, you mentioned cards that you might want to consider adding living roots. I mean, living mana. Blitztide Hydra, possibly also I don't know if you mentioned it, the Murloc the water package.
Yeah, so there's Finger and Bluegill and Murloc War Leader, which obviously can be a little bit expensive. I mean, that's one legendary and two epics. That is seen in a lot of the top tier token druid lists. There's also Hungry Crab if you're facing a lot of either token druids with running the water package or the Murloc package, or you're facing a lot of the Murloc Paladins. Hungry Crab can be good. It can also be good in the Hunter list that we had earlier. But of
Yeah.
course, it is an epic, so
But yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, in terms of, if you start a deck as a budget, it can eventually grow into being, full-fledged as you slowly grow your collection as well.
yeah, it can definitely be like a top tier deck,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think um, these are three like very good decks for new players. Yeah, not much more to add to that really. I think. Do
Yeah,
you have any
I think
other?
I think we've covered quite a lot of it.
Yeah. So I think this meta in general, this has is like pretty good for newer players. There's a lot of top tier decks. I mean, the first two we covered, those are like top tier decks, and they are under 2,000 dust. So there's a lot of good options for free to play players and players with smaller collections.
So I
Um,
think just sort of a small, I mean, we're obviously not going to talk much about it, but I think just a small sort of notable mentions of decks that, like, I think we were discussing a bit earlier, but I think just to mention them, that the chance are you might not, because they are some of the cards that they are missing are quite important. You might not reach legend with it, but a lot of some decks you can still reach easily rank 5, ranked, high ranks with it,
yeah,
or decks like Pirate Warrior, without the Leo and the patches. I mean, the thing is, if you play the deck, if you've like for myself, I've played the deck on EU with the full collection, so obviously I know what the deck can do. But then when I go to NA and I played without those, there are many games where you will go, okay, if I had this card, I would win now, but unfortunately, because I do not have Leroy or I don't have patches, I
yeah,
simply lose.
for
But
sure.
if you're but like the thing is, if you are playing if you're free to play and your budget, you're gonna have to accept that you're going to get slightly more budget results. You
Yeah,
might still do well, but there's still a good chance that you are going to lose games where you could have won if you had that particular card.
yeah,
So I think Pirate Warrior. What other deck did we say? Silence Priest, I think, is also like that.
yeah.
You can
Yeah. I mean, you
you can
can
build
play with without Faceless Shamblers and without Lyra, but Lyra definitely adds some fun shenanigans if you do have her, and the Faceless Shamblers are pretty important for getting extra value out of your buffs and extra use out of your minions that can't attack.
exactly. So yeah, so that's just sort of ideas to give other players that all hope is not lost. It's just that like in those particular cases, those decks will they will you will notice that it will suffer because you don't have those cards.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, as we mentioned on a sort of parting note, if you do happen to have some legendaries, you can definitely make them work. I mean, one of your favorite legendaries is Elise, and I mean that's a card you can fit into a lot of decks. I mean,
yeah.
you could fit Elise into Secret Mage. Like it doesn't really make that much sense, but you could. You can fit it into some more control mages. You can even fit it in mid-range hunter. I tested in mid-range hunter for quite a while. um,
Really.
yeah. But I mean, like that's definitely a fun card that you can add to decks to help. I mean, probably this aggro token druid is the one deck I definitely wouldn't really want to play it in.
But it's
Um,
it's a card that if you have, it will help a lot of your decks.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, and I mean, once again, like if you have quests like Warrior Quest or Rogue Quest, then you can definitely build around them. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting decks. I'd say there aren't really that many decks that are like prohibitively expensive. Probably, the main culprits being the Paladin decks because, requiring legendaries like Tyrion and Sunkeeper Tarim, and then quite a few epics as well. Control Paladin being the most expensive at like 15,000 dust, some of the
Yeah,
lists.
that's now yeah, it has become quite an expensive
Yeah, Wallet
deck.
Paladin, we can start calling it, as we used to call Control Warrior, Wallet Warrior.
Yeah, what
Um,
or
yeah, and I mean,
even some of the mage decks now with cards like Meteor and Gluttonous Ooze,
Medivh.
Medivh, they randomly their prices obviously that does cost. But now, obviously, in the cases of those, if you have things like Karazhan, where I think you get Medivh in Karazhan,
Yeah,
and you even get Curator. So a lot of the decks now, if you have, for example, Karazhan, your deck, a lot of your decks become a lot cheaper because,
sure, yeah,
Curator is great, Medivh is great,
yeah,
and so yeah, like we say, it's you got to look at what do you have in your deck, I mean in your collection, and then obviously try play to the strengths is obviously a good idea.
yeah. So, there's a lot of, a lot of room for growth. So don't be disheartened if you haven't spent hundreds of dollars on the game. You can definitely still, have build some good decks and definitely have a lot of fun and get really high ranks. If anyone does play any of these decks to high ranks, let me know. We
Let us
can, yeah, let us know. We can give you like a shout out or something, or let us know how you're finding these decks, or you can tweet at either one of us if you want to maybe find out about, some budget options for whatever your favorite class is. If your favorite class is Shaman or Rogue or something, maybe we can give you some advice. So, tweet at us. Our Twitter handles are here respectively at Dale Pon and at Dib_gaming. And yeah, just like, subscribe, all those things help the channel grow. Let us know what other content you would maybe like to us to talk about. Ask us any questions you have. Yeah, let us know. Any feedback is really appreciated.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. That's
Thanks.
all I think for this Magma Ragers episode
So
12. Cheers.